Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Kino. We were meant to talk about Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo this week, but with what's going on in the world right now and in America, we decided we would want to amplify Black voices. And so we're looking at the film I Am Not Your Negro, directed by Raoul Peck, written by James Baldwin. It's a documentary from 2016. Before we start talking about the movie, we would like to say Ryan and I stand with the protesters, and both of us, we've donated money. Both of us have donated money to the cause. Ryan just donated money to the Chicago Bail Fund. I donated money to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, and I plan on donating more. And we implore you to do the same. I'm going to link below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or the podcast version. I'm linking in the description of the episode where you can donate and what petitions you can sign, all that stuff. So I'll leave links to that below, so you can quickly look. Yeah. So anything else you want to add to that, Ryan?
No, I think you pretty much said it all. I think everyone right now has their duty to do their part, raise awareness, and tackle the issue head on. Especially you and me, I feel like, because we are Americans.
Racism isn't a U.S. only problem.
No, I know. But I feel like
this all started in the U.S. and we.
Yes, that's more so what I mean. I don't mean the topic of racism, but like more so what's going on right now. I feel like it hits a bit. It hits home for you and I in a way, because like we're American, and it is a blemish on where we're from and whatnot. So it's something you and I are currently tackling. So we thought, why not? The podcast is a great place to discuss some of especially some of the ideas that this film discusses are very relevant and very topical, and very much related to what it means to be an American. And I feel like you and I can come at it from that perspective as well.
And I'm very happy to see also, for example, that there are protests happening in Amsterdam. Dam Square was completely filled with thousands of people.
I saw that.
And look, because racism is also an issue in the Netherlands. Blackface is a Christmas tradition essentially there.
Yep.
And
even though the Dutch don't like classify it as blackface,
but it is. And there's Netherlands isn't police brutality against against Black people isn't exclusive to America, as it can also happen in the Netherlands or anywhere in the world. So I'm happy
to happen here in the UK
all
as
these
well.
Protests happening around the world. Yep. Also in the UK.
Yeah.
So
all right, well,
let's talk about the movie.
Yes.
Well,
you saw it for the first time a few weeks ago.
No,
a couple weeks ago.
A couple days ago. I decided to watch it.
You watched it this week.
I decided to watch it, I think, on Sunday. I've been meaning to watch it for years. This is a documentary on the right, like it's an adaptation documentary on an unfinished James Baldwin book, and I've been interested in James Baldwin since If Beale Street Could Talk, since that's an adaptation of one of his books. And after I watched that film, I read his book, The Fire Next Time, which is excellent. If you want some good literature right now on any of these issues, I highly recommend reading The Fire Next Time. And he's a very interesting figure that I hadn't heard of before I watched If Beale Street Could Talk.
I heard about him in high school, just because like when it comes to English class, it was something that we discussed. I didn't know that actually about If Beale Street Could Talk. I think I'm not particularly a fan of that film. It's a bit too slow for me, but I love this film. And something that I think you and I both feel, something that we both mentioned in our Letterboxd review was like the eloquence of his writing. And I feel like that comes
unbelievable.
And like, of course that's going to come through in this film, because it's like, it's all his words, but I feel like this was much more powerful to me than like If Beale Street Could Talk, I guess. Mainly just because I think, this is a documentary which has different effects. But I also think like his voice, and I feel like message and intent comes through a lot more clearly than on what I remember if Beale Street Could Talk. Maybe if I rewatched it under this prism, it'd be different. But yeah, so I watched it for the first time this morning.
I rewatched it this morning.
Did you? Okay, good. Yeah, watched it for the first time this morning, and I thought it was a great film. You know, I thought that it was really great how it conveyed so much through language. Like, yes, it uses images to complement the words, but the words are there foremost. Mm-hmm. And even though like the film, even though like it is a film, you can tell that the director, I don't know how to, you know, really.
I think it's
Raoul Peck.
Well, let me check if I'm right. Yeah, Raoul Peck.
You know, I feel like he's kept the underlying basis of Baldwin's writing, and that he understood that that's what matters more so than anything that they could potentially show. It's more so about what Baldwin has to say, and I love that emphasis. I thought that was really well done. You know, Sam Jackson does a great job narrating, great narration. Actually, I felt.
Sometimes I feel like sometimes I liked his narration. Sometimes I didn't.
I forgot it was him at some point.
Yeah, it doesn't sound exactly like him, but his voice is very serious and very honest, but very gravelly to the point where sometimes I had a hard time
understanding.
Yeah, because it's like he's really like in an earnest tone, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But sometimes it just the grovel in his voice just kind of was a bit too strong for me to like pay attention to all the words being said. And so sometimes I feel like it was a little bit distracting, but most of the time I really enjoyed it. It doesn't sound like Sam Jackson, like you know him really.
Yeah.
And it's great. It was great that they got him to do this. I'm sure it helped them a lot with the funding and everything related to that, having such a big name attached to it. Just this documentary doesn't scream to me as a very high budget documentary.
No.
It like there's moments where I thought like where they filmed their own footage where I'm like, this looks a little bit cheap. Not that
I didn't
the quality of the film at all.
That was something that I did have a slight issue with, but it's more of a nitpick because it doesn't have that much to do overall with the film. But like the stuff they filmed on their own, I didn't see the need for it. Everything they showed, I just was like, I don't see why you're filming this relates to what he's saying when you could show it as you have throughout the rest of the film with archival footage or pieces of film or modern day footage or stuff like that. Like, why did you have to film your own stuff? Like I mean, again, it's a small part of the film, but like, I agree with you on that. It's just like, it's not, because it goes from like this piece of documentary filmmaking where it's so much about and from Baldwin's perspective. And then I feel like when they try to like shoot their own stuff of just like current day New York, like the stuff of Times Square, I just thought that was a bit strange
he was talking about Times Square and they're trying to.
He's talking about, but I mean,
he mentioned Times Square in that spiel.
Well, he talks about coming back to New York and yeah, it has relation in that sense, but that's more of a nitpick. That's not like an actual issue.
In terms of, I really enjoyed how they used the clips of various films. I thought that was excellent. In your first year of university, did you guys watch The Imitations of Life?
I don't think so now.
That is a shame. Fantastic movie. They show a clip of it in this, the original from I think the 1930s. There's a remake from the 1950s, which is what we watched, which apparently is superior to the 1930s version.
I see it.
And they show a clip of the original 30s one, and I'm sure both of them are excellent. I only saw the 50s one. Fantastic film. Everyone in my class enjoyed it. It's like one of those, I had never heard of it before, and it's just
me neither.
Like, great, very progressive for the time as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm reading.
It's in the film. It's the clip they show of a black mother coming to school, and her seemingly white daughter doesn't want to acknowledge that she is.
Yeah, she's embarrassed.
She's embarrassed, and that it's the movie goes much further than that. But if I had to recommend another thing that you may not have heard of, The Imitations of Life, absolutely fantastic.
I'll have to give that 50s one a watch then.
Yeah, no, it's great. We watched it for my history class.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, no,
Definitely not something we screened first year.
I didn't know if you had it. And also the various Sidney Poitier films. I mentioned this like a month and a half ago or 2 months ago. I was watching a bunch of Sidney Poitier films. I think I watched like 8 or 9. They were all on the Criterion Channel. I took too long to finish them, to watch them all, because there were so many, and I took a little bit of a break. And Criterion Channel lost the license to most of them, so I wasn't able to finish my go through. But it was nice seeing some of the films I watched in this film, such as is it called the Defiant Ones?
No, the yeah. They
the Defiant Ones.
Clip from
it's the 1958 film. Not the documentary you were telling me about this. It's a documentary.
Not the documentary about Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine. Definitely not that.
No,
definitely not that.
They showed a clip from the Defiant Ones, which they tap into the controversy of that film and the ending of that film. But Sidney Poitier, fantastic actor. If you want to watch some great films,
I like that they discussed his involvement, and I liked especially how they discussed. Yeah, and I really liked how they discussed the role that entertainment has on projecting this idea of being Black in America. And in particular, the scene from a film with a white cop and Sidney Poitier is like a Black detective. And it's like the end of the film, and Baldwin's talking about how Baldwin's talking about how, like, kissing in film isn't necessarily about like romance or love, but reconciliation. And in that moment between the two of them, that would have fit. But because in America, men can't kiss other men, it's like it's layers upon layers of like how America has like repressed like certain individualistic ideals, mainly because of its lack of understanding of them. And to me, that is like the through line of the film. And then my Letterboxd review, I put down a quote from the film that was like my absolute favorite, because I think it completely sums up what's going on now, and it completely sums up like the chronicling of the African American experience in America, which is, he said, "You never had to look at me. I had to look at you. I know more about you than you know about me. Not everything that space can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And there's just so much in that quote. I think that like, especially today, like, I think it's important to like to really consider that and think about that. I actually wanted to talk about like one or two of the things I think that the film doesn't do particularly well, because you and I both gave it 4 stars.
Yeah, this isn't like the best documentary I've seen or anything.
No, I want to start with that, just so we can put more focus on what it does well and more focus on
I was about to bring up some things
what the film's talking about. So for me, the biggest issue with the film is the structure. Now going into it and like knowing what I knew about it, I was like, okay, well, the plot is described as, Baldwin is approaching African American experience through the lens of the assassinations of I remember, so Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and I can't remember the first
Medgar.
Medgar. I was thinking Edgar, but I was like, no, that's not quite right. Yeah, Medgar.
Medgar. Let me look up his last name. We should.
Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers. I thought so. Medgar Evers. But that's not really what the film does. And the structure, like, I liked how it bounced from past to like present to show like that things haven't changed. That's really effective. But also, I in its own past version, there was no linear or like it didn't, it structure didn't follow any linear pattern or a thematic one. It just felt more like they just went through his notes and then kind of jumped around off that. Well, and I found it to be quite erratic, because I feel like the structure could have really been implemented to like they could have maybe heightened that past versus present distinction, and how like really those things are the same, or they could have done it somewhat linearly, right, the way that Baldwin talks about. But I feel like they don't really do that. So then as I'm watching the film, like scene to scene, I know it's like I'm getting a lot from it. But when I think about the film overall, in terms of connective tissue from moment to moment, I just don't know. Like it doesn't really feel like this connected, cohesive film all the time, which to me is frustrating. And to me, that's my biggest issue with the film. The only other like small issue I had was at the very end, and so many films now do this, not just documentaries. Black Klansman did it. I mean, you could go back to the 90s for like a separate issue about anti-Semitism in Schindler's List. But they do this thing where like you show like real people who have been like affected by it, and like, yes, that's important to do, but like, I feel like it's really cliche now to do it, and it's so much less powerful because they do that at the end. They show the faces of various African American people and their families, but I didn't find that nearly as powerful as what Baldwin had to say at the very, very end, or what he had to say right before. And I get why they have to put that in there, because it's important. It is an important issue, and it's important to put faces to names. But I feel like they had already done that. And when I got to that point, I just see that now. I'm like, okay, so it's doing the same thing that Black Klansman did. It's doing, the
this
same
came out
thing
before
that
Black Klansman, though.
Right. I know. I'm not saying that it's copying Black Klansman. I'm just saying like it is that's what these type of films that raise social awareness, I think, do. And I think it's a bit cloying to be able to get that emotion out of the audience when the rest of the film to me was smarter than that, and like went about emotionally. It was more about getting an emotional response out of you by provoking you and like making you think and challenging your perceptions, rather than just being like, feel something, look at the people it's affected. But like we've already seen that, so I was a bit frustrated with that because I thought the film was much smarter than that.
I don't.
Those are really my only two like issues with the film.
I don't mind the thing you're calling a cliche at the end, because it doesn't handle it nearly as well as something like Black Klansman did. Because Black Klansman is a moment where everyone in the theater had goosebumps. When you watch it, we saw it together actually.
Yep.
When it came out. It's a truly incredible moment when that happens in Black Klansman. And it works so well, and it could have worked. It could not have worked well. But in this film, there's an element where there's definitely a better way of doing it than what they did. But as you said, it is necessary. It is necessary, as you said. But there probably is a better way of doing it than what they did. And I agree with you that the final moments, the final moments with James Baldwin, where he's saying, "I am a man," is incredible.
That's
incredible.
So much more powerful. Because the thing is, they just show these people's faces, but I don't actually hear anything from them. Like I'm not really sure, like other than the fact that they're African Americans, I'm not really sure who they.
It's just people being seen. But I agree with you.
But again,
there
there's
probably is a better way of doing it.
Because to me, that just felt a bit cloying.
Like
it really felt like tugging on heartstrings.
It's not a fault of the film to me, but there is a better way of doing it. I agree with you with the structure. The film is at a fault because it is working based on an unfinished book. It's working on 30 pages of notes, which weren't finalized. Yeah, and so I don't know. I think they've published the book in quotation marks.
The 30 pages,
yeah, quote unquote. Because I remember seeing it in the bookstore when I went to buy the Fire Next Time. So I think they have, and I think it was called "I Am Not Your Negro," and it was a tie-in with the film. So I think they have published the book, the quote unquote. But I don't know how, but I haven't read it, so I don't know how faithfully the film follows the structure of that, and because perhaps they felt compelled to really follow the structure of the unfinished notes, which are maybe not perfect because it's unfinished, which lends to the structure not working as well, or they tried to have their own spin on the structure. So I don't know exactly what they did, but I agree with you that it doesn't work 100%.
Yeah,
and it probably is just because it's working off unfinished work.
I thought that, but then I thought, but his ideas and what he's speaking about, there is such a strong like thematic connection through it that I felt like the way they could have presented it, like I'd like they broke it up into these chapters with titles.
Yep.
And I
all that stuff.
Yeah, and like, well, I guess that is a byproduct of the fact that it's from him. But I don't know, the structure, it was disorientating at times, and it was frustrating. Okay, do you have any specific or other issues predominantly with the film?
Music cues sometimes came out of nowhere.
Like score or soundtrack?
Soundtrack.
Yeah,
two
I
moments
agree.
specifically. The very start of the film, it opens with
I
James
thought the
Baldwin
same.
talking, and
Yeah,
it
I
then
thought the same
transitions
thing.
very quickly into modern day footage of people rioting and protesting, which good contrast, like Black Klansman. That contrast.
The music choice was
good.
strange though.
It wasn't that it was strange. It just it came.
It didn't fit.
Super abruptly. There was it has to do with the sound design.
Sure.
I don't think the song is the fault. It's the sound design and the sound editing that led into the song. It just was like whiplash. Because you went from no music at all to bam, really loud.
Yeah.
And it didn't mesh well. And at the end, the final moments of the film ends the same way.
Same thing.
James Baldwin talking, and then bam, credits, really loud song.
Yeah.
And it didn't mix as well. Especially with the end, I would have liked to sit on his words instead of be bombarded with music.
Agree. Absolutely, yeah.
And so
totally agree.
That I think is the structure, like what you said, and the music cues that only happened like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
But the soundtrack overall, the score, overall was really good. And
I thought the score was good. I thought there were a couple of times, and like predominantly the first one, where the music choice, like I get what they were going for, and like the tone of the song contrasted with the visuals, but that wasn't really something that this film was trying to do throughout. So it was kind of strange that they did that at the start, and then throughout they didn't really do it. I mean, it didn't really bother me too much. I mean, the sound design, you bring up a good point about that, but like, yeah, I mean, I thought the score was on point, and the editing was really on point as well. Very very good editing, I felt like.
So we've said what the very minor issues we had with the film. I think the music and all that. Structurally, the film was a bit flawed, but overall, rest of the film, great. Archival footage of James Baldwin used throughout.
It's the best part for me.
Agree.
Whenever they cut to him speaking, TV shows,
the Dick Cavett show,
meetings, when he's giving speeches, interviews, it's like that to me is, I could have watched an hour and a half of that instead and been like perfectly happy with it.
Well, there's a lot of that. You can watch it on YouTube. It's the speech for example, they show at Cambridge. It's called the
Cambridge one.
The pin drop speech is also like an hour. So there's a lot of speeches of his you can watch. And I have been watching on YouTube some of his speeches over the past few days.
Yeah, I definitely will be after this morning.
He's so eloquent that it's just so.
Yeah.
It pulls you into the film whenever he's talking, and when the subject matter.
Absolutely.
He's so on point with everything he's saying.
Yeah.
It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I the reason I thought this was such a good film was because I felt like, and granted, it is, it's his perspective and, his understanding of the world. But I felt like this was the most comprehensive understanding as to why racial tensions exist in America, and like his perception of it. And even at the end, he's like, people have to ask why. And
he digs at the why in the book I mentioned, The Fire Next Time. It's all about the why.
I love that, mainly just because, I mean, for me, not necessarily with this, but like, I don't know, for me in life, I always question, why. So I thought it was great how the way he approached it as to the need to understand why is key. And specifically, there are a couple scenes where he really delves into that. And there's one where they contrast it with white people at a grocery store, and he's really talking about how the inherent fear and misunderstanding of African Americans is what leads to white people being more hostile and having a lesser understanding of the African American experience. But to a greater extent, it means that what is happening in the public sphere in terms of racial tensions and then whatnot bleeds into people's private lives and their own private ideals, because they don't question why. And I thought that was so interesting, the way that he laid that out. And that was, I mean, it was, Sam Jackson read that. It wasn't like him actually speaking it, but like, I thought that was like a super eloquent and amazing point of just like, this is someone who's getting into the psychosis of both races and trying to understand and effectively doing so. And like, when we set to watch this, late last night, I thought, it'll be an interesting documentary, but I didn't think I'd learn so much. And in that sense, I felt like I truly learned from this documentary. And I have a really deep appreciation for that. And I just think, again, the eloquence of his words is what it's based on.
Yes.
Yeah.
How much do you know about James Baldwin after watching this? Like, do you,
as a person, or
yeah,
like,
because the film doesn't touch upon his life really, outside
I
of
feel like I have a very good understanding of his life.
Because they only mention his homosexuality once.
Right. To me, after watching the film, from like his description of like his life and whatnot, like I have like a pretty okay understanding. Just like grew up in Harlem, went away to Paris for a long time, for racial reasons, came back home, became an active part of the civil rights movement, became friends with anybody and everyone who supported the movement, black or white, didn't really matter. I mean, they show extensively the fact that like Marlon Brando was actually a big part of the movement, and like Baldwin was like knew him quite well, which is interesting. Yeah, the homosexuality thing they only allude to once, but I feel like that scene I was mentioning earlier with Sidney Poitier in that film, and he's talking about like having a kiss. I feel like that is Baldwin, like in his own way, being like, I am repressed as a black man, and I'm repressed as a homosexual man. And to me, that's how like I felt like they touched, like in a sense, they touched upon it then by like giving that its due. I feel like. But I felt like the film wasn't about him. It was about his ideals.
Yeah, but yes, I agree. I'm happy you understood all that, because based on this documentary, watching it the first time, I was like, I don't know how much someone who doesn't know about James Baldwin will like know about him and not compared to his ideas.
Yeah.
But
I knew next to nothing, but I definitely feel like I got a good sense of who he was, 100%.
They also show Charlton Heston, which confused me, because I thought Charlton Heston was more of a conservative. Because I know that after after Columbine, he gave a famous pro-gun speech where he's like, "You don't take the gun away from my cold head to hands," or whatever. So I was a little bit. I didn't know he was so progressive in the '60s and part of the movement. Because I saw first
progressive in some ways, regressive in others.
Yes, I saw him this Republican pro-gun speech before I saw this film, and so I just assumed he'd always been more of a conservative.
Sure.
But yes, I'm happy you understand who James Baldwin is, because he's a super interesting figure to me. I also think the first time I looked him up, he's a very interesting person.
His smile is a very
infectious smile.
It really is infectious.
Yes, and there's this photo. It's used in one of the posters where he's wearing the sunglasses and he looks so cool. And I was like, who is this person? I need to look into who this person is. No, and looking into my notes, I thought this film tapped into Black American isolation.
Yeah.
Because he gives this whole story about how he was like, quote unquote, dating a white woman when he was younger.
Oh yeah.
And they couldn't be seen together. It was safer for her to walk alone in the streets of New York than be with him.
Yep.
And so that he's so isolated by all this segregation and racism, and it's just fascinating. I was like absolutely enthralled by that story. just to see that whole thing play out from his perspective.
Yeah.
And like the deep sadness you get from all of this, you clearly can tell he's a very sad person. And he's saddened by what's happening. But yeah,
he looks worn down a lot of the interviews, and like he still speaks eloquently, but like what I got from the interviews, the one that's at the very end and the Dick Cavett show, both, I got the sense that like he just seemed tired, not defeated, but just tired.
Yes.
And like it was interesting to see, because despite that, he was still so passionate and so clear about his ideas, and the way he explained them to me was never preachy. It was just matter of fact, which I thought was great. And obviously that's not something that the film can do. I mean, you're just watching real life at that point. The film's just presenting it to you.
And he talks so much about these different like activists and these different leaders who like they shared most of their ideas together, but like some of them had very different ideals with him. He had different ideals with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King at points.
Yep.
Because he wasn't a black Muslim like like Malcolm X, for example. So they shared ideas, but they were still intrinsically together. And they were one and all. And like he says he loved Malcolm X, he loved Martin Luther King, and he tells the story about how he was at the funeral of Martin Luther King.
Yeah, that was great.
It was heartbreaking.
Very very sad.
Absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I had something I wanted to say, but I forgot. The going back to the archival footage, there's this one interview he does that's just from a filmmaking perspective looks strikingly beautiful. It's the one they interview Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. and James Baldwin, but they of course mostly only show James Baldwin in the film because it's about him and his book. And that it's him against a completely pitch black background, and it looks gorgeous.
Yeah, it looks great.
Actually, it's where he gives the "I am a man" speech.
Yeah. Actually, you saying that reminded me of something. So about, I think it was in the first half hour when like they're having those set of interviews, but they're showing Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Excuse me. The part where the interviewer is like, Malcolm X to Martin Luther King is saying, Malcolm X said that like you're the modern day equivalent of an Uncle Tom, and like all these thoughts, and then he's like, oh well, do you care to comment? Like if you rewatch that, you can tell that like he's tearing up. He's like King is like holding back this emotion because he's like, you can tell he's genuinely insulted and hurt by Malcolm X's words. And I like that the film wasn't afraid to show that like, yeah, sometimes people do like people have disagreements, and like Baldwin had a different approach to those two, but that's not to say any approach is incorrect. It's just
but
it's just a given approach.
He specifically mentions that by the end of their lives, they were closer together than ever before.
They met halfway.
Yeah, they were.
Which is interesting because Malcolm X died 5 years before Martin Luther King did, right?
I don't actually know that. Let me look it up.
I think he did because I think they said Malcolm X died in 1963, but Martin Luther King Jr.
died in 1965.
1968. Oh, 65.
65, and Martin Luther King died in 1968.
Yeah. Okay, so 3 years apart.
Also, they touch upon this a little bit, but they mentioned that J. Edgar Hoover had a profile on James Baldwin, and that's where they mentioned the homosexuality thing. His FBI profile, I should look this up, was massive. Like
really
huge. Like maybe you can talk a bit while I look this up, but his FBI profile was like ginormous. FBI Baldwin.
Well, I thought that was an interesting part of the film for them to include that and have a discussion on that. I thought that was interesting to show that. I mean, so something that we've kind of touched on that I personally was a one of my favorite parts of the film was like the way that they use clips from other films and the representation of African American in media. But I think by them doing that, it wasn't just, they weren't just doing that, like, because we've seen that before, but like that paired with what Baldwin was saying was revealing, I thought, this underrepresented part of what it means to be an African American in America, not in the sense of how you're portrayed in the media, but how people see you. And yes, it is important to be seen, but it's also important to consider how you are being seen. Mm-hmm. And to me, that thing with the little girl embarrassed to be Black, she was, she's embarrassed to be seen that way. Or some of the Sidney Poitier films, like one that really struck out in my mind that he really talks about in depth is the one where he's chained to a white man, and
that's the Defiant Ones.
The Defiant Ones. Okay, great. Yeah, that one to me in specific I thought was great, because he talks about the end. It's like basically by Sidney Poitier jumping off the train, it's giving validation to white viewers, but enraging Black ones, because it's basically saying that, Black people will be there to support the white man, but at a cost of whatever their individual freedoms may be.
That was,
and I thought just the way that they brought those in, not just the ones that he talked about, but it felt like the filmmakers understood, okay, Baldwin is talking about, a few films and how it relates to his ideals. We should bring in more clips from films from that period of time to nail home other parts. So it's as if, even though he's not talking about it in his writing, we are furthering his eloquence in his writing through visuals and through this medium of a documentary, which I thought was really excellent. I was a big fan of how they handled that.
By the way, the FBI file on him contained 1,884 pages, which is insane.
I wonder why.
Why did the FBI spy on Baldwin? He was a novelist, essayist, and critic, one of the most distinguished writers and thinkers of his time. His skin was Black, his sexuality fluid, and his politics tended toward the left, a combination that was enough to turn him into a target for the FBI. So, yeah. Unbelievable. And there's a book like breaking down the FBI report on him, because I think it's all public now.
Yeah. It should be all public by now. Enough time has passed.
FBI records the vault, James Baldwin. So apparently, yeah.
Okay.
Going back to the film, there's a moment where they show a Black woman with and they have a news report playing over it. Black woman with a policeman here, and he has her knee on her neck, and they show that in the film. And
obviously that has very current day political implications. One of the uses of footage that they used that is actually an affiliation with what we talked about last week with American History X was the Rodney King stuff. And it's
Not
interesting
only
because
that, they show people holding up like white power signs.
Yeah. Well, I liked how
Nazi
I'm
symbols.
I'm actually glad that we've watched these two in tandem now, because
I was thinking that earlier.
When watching, the Rodney King beating, because I've never seen it. I've heard about it before, but I've never seen actual footage of it.
Wow.
So when they were talking about American History X, like I knew what it was. So obviously it was like, oh, I can't believe he's standing up for this, but I didn't quite understand the full scope of it. But seeing this now, it's like, wow. So now that I am seeing the visual representation of this, I'm thinking about back to that film, which only enhances the message of that film about hate and racism and generational issues that are a part of American culture. And this film's exploring similar ideas, but from the other side of the fence. And I honestly, the fact that we've watched both in a weird way has really enhanced both films for me, because I feel like now it's this greater scope of racism, history, all these things that make up what it means to be an African American in America, but also how white Americans have to reconcile with the fact that it is not their country anymore. It is everyone's country. And I just, it's that connection between the two films is only something, I really thought about until, before we started recording. But it just, the use of that kind of archival footage to me made things a lot more, not real real, but also more visceral, I'd say, a lot more visceral. And yeah, it was quite powerful. I mean, they showed other stuff as well. Lots of instances.
They show a lot of police brutality
down,
instances, but to me, what stood out is the people in the street with white power and Nazi symbols, which insane.
Yep.
And then of course they have also the as I mentioned, the cop with a knee on a woman's neck.
Yep.
Which, unbelievable. Yep. And that still happens today. So of course this film highlights even better now than when it came out, how absolutely nothing has changed, which validates the protests going on right now. Yep. And the words of James Baldwin throughout the film speak so clear and loudly to everything that is going on at the moment. The whole reason we did this episode is because we wanted to discuss something important, and we wanted to amplify James Baldwin and all the other people, all their voices in this. We want to amplify these Black voices so that you are incentivized to look into it yourself.
And I would specifically say, I would say Baldwin in specific, mainly because it was someone I am unfamiliar with. But out of all the things I've been reading lately, and all the Black activists, whether it was in the 60s of the people they were talking about in this film, or currently 70s, 80s, doesn't matter. But from watching this film and actually understanding more about Baldwin and hearing his perspective, it's one, made me want to actually go out and read more of his stuff. But two, his viewpoint of how he views the situation has gotten me to rethink more about my position in it than anything else has, and it's definitely changed some of my own personal views in a few ways. And I think that is the power of his writing and his speech. Yep. And I feel like he's someone that people don't really talk about, because he's not as famous. He was never really at the forefront.
He's not as famous as Martin Luther King Jr.
I feel a shame, because I think what he says and the way he gets, people who aren't Black to empathize, to understand, and for them to want to understand in the same way he wants to understand. And I feel like that is different for Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and, some of these other people, is just the way there's something about the way that Baldwin writes and speaks and just conveys his ideas in a clear, succinct, and elegant way, to where I feel like I'm thinking more and I'm being challenged more. And I think nowadays that's what needs to happen. And it's not happening enough, because a lot of people think, oh, well, I know the teachings and writings of the prominent Black and civil rights movement leaders, but I feel like Baldwin is a somewhat underrepresented one. So if anything comes of this, I hope that people just go out and look at his stuff more, because I feel like what he's saying about who we are as human beings is more relevant than some of the stuff more relevant today than some of the stuff that King or Malcolm X said back then. The situations are still the same. And I feel like Baldwin's words are that connective tissue between past and present. And this film really highlights that for me. And it takes it beyond the experience of watching a film, and it makes it become a part of modern day history. And to me, that was something I really valued about the experience of watching the film, and something I really valued about, what to me the film means overall. And I think that's this is an important film. And we talked about maybe doing 13th, and as much as I would have enjoyed to do that, just because I haven't seen that film,
I haven't seen it either. I will watch it this week.
And I love Ava DuVernay, but I think it's better we watch this, because this is not as mainstream in terms of the film itself, but also in terms of who it's about. And I feel like raising awareness about aspects of the movement that have prolonged and been a part of American culture for so long, we now need to understand more than ever. And I think Baldwin has that perspective, that understanding. I mean, that one quote I mentioned earlier, to me, just it in a way like changed, like it changed a lot of how I view the experience looking from the outside, because you and I can only look from the outside, because we I mean, you and I aren't Black. We cannot, you know, understand in the sense that like we'll never go through the things that African Americans and Black people have to face when it comes to discrimination and racism. But Baldwin's words were the first time they didn't just like place me and like make me understand the other side, but it went beyond that. It's hard to, I don't know, it's hard to describe, because it pushed boundaries in a way for me that was quite remarkable. And it was his writing and his understanding. And like I like, if anything, and I don't know how much to attribute this to the quality of the film, but the reason I enjoyed it so much was the writing, what was, you know, was that
speech. And I think that's the power
excellent.
of words, which are so important.
Being forgotten, I think.
The power of action in words can never be understated. And that's why, again, I'll say you can read some good Baldwin. I haven't read The Native Son, which he wrote, but The Fire Next Time is excellent. It's short. It's incredibly short, actually. And like half of it is set up to be a letter to his nephew about what it's like to be to grow up Black in America, and it's so powerful, and it's incredibly moving and enlightening. And I highly recommend you look that up. Before we move on to Yojimbo at the end, I'd like to say a couple names, since that's always important. The names of victims. There's so many that I can't even cover, but I'll start with a couple. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Philandro Castile, Samuel DuBose, Sandra Bland, Walter Scott, Terrence Crutcher, Michael Lorenzo Dean, Eric Reason, Christopher McCorvey, Christopher Whitfield. Sorry, I'm using a photo to look at these names, and they're very low quality, so I have a hard time reading the names. Tatiana Jefferson, Maurice Hawley, Jordan Michael Griffin, Nicholas Walker, Benny Branch, Byron Williams. That is only one column from so many names that need to be said.
Well, a lot of those names were mentioned in the film as well. Like that was something they did early on that I thought was quite effective.
Trayvon Martin was mentioned.
Yeah, the I can't remember what specific quote, but something about like growing up in America is this understanding that like your brothers and sisters will be gunned down and killed around you. And they show, and like while, you know, this quote's being recited, they show a lot of the victims over the past 20 years in America. And like I thought that was quite powerful.
Yes, especially having their birthdays
to include that.
Their birthdays in it as well.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know Trayvon Martin was born the same year as my sister. So that was that was moving as well. I didn't know.
Well, a lot of them were older than I remember them being, because a lot of this stuff when it happened, obviously I was a lot younger, and when it happened on the news, I always thought they were like young teenagers, not near adults. A lot of these people were almost adults, like
Trayvon
19,
Martin
20-year-olds.
was 17.
Yeah, he was like on the cusp, and I thought a lot of these kids were
a full life ahead of them.
Yeah, I thought they were a lot younger. So seeing them, how like they were just on the cusp of like breaking out and like, you know, having a life of their own, it's really sad. And like the film does a good job of honoring that in a way that, you know, show that Baldwin's words prescribe not to just what's going on now, but to what has happened to lots of young African American kids and the reality that they unfortunately have to live in, and how that's, you know, yes, it's and how, you know, the deaths of these kids have left an indelible mark on those who have been left behind, and how that changes the worldview. And you know, they show a lot of victims, and you know, some of them I never heard of or don't remember being on the news, and it's just like, wow, like there's so much more that's, you know, going on or doesn't even get reported than some of these big cases. Like, yeah, the George Floyds and Trayvon Martins are important to know and to get movements going, but like there's so much more that like overseas we don't know about, or even living in America you don't know about. It's just, it happens and it doesn't always get reported because sometimes, unfortunately, it's just what is going on, and it's really it is really something that is need for change. And I feel like genuinely after watching this, I feel like Baldwin's words like pave that way. Like, at least from like my perspective after watching this, is like heeding his words and his advice is the way forward. And I think that like that is the power of this film for me personally.
Yeah, I yeah, what you said rings so true, that people have been protesting for so long and nothing has changed.
Yep.
And the change is so necessary.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Just like the fact that protests haven't worked up to this point is, I mean, it proves Baldwin's point. It's just like the power
some
structures
protests
of the
have
Western
worked,
world
but
are keeping
not
people
to the extent that they need to be.
Nah, yeah, exactly. And it's just, it's a serious issue, and hopefully from this, that what's gone on with George Floyd and the protests and whatnot. I mean, this has gotten so big to the point where it could lead to some change, hopefully. But
yes,
I think the best we can do now is let our support be known, let those voices be heard, and I genuinely follow Baldwin's example.
Yes, we need to be amplifying Black voices like Baldwin's, and there are other people who are alive whose voices need to be amplified as well.
Yep.
I just picked an example who I had been interested in for a while, and we also need to be signing petitions, donating money. Hence, again, I'll mention it again, linked in the description of the episode.
Yeah.
So please do that. Any money can help.
There's really no excuse, especially because that link has so many different ways you can donate, different organizations in different cities and states. Like
you can donate to the victims, to the protesters, to the anything. There's so many links.
Anything you want. And it's just like there's no excuse not to. So well, that's all my thoughts on the film. Anything else you'd like to
say all
add?
Cops are bastards, which I'm very vocal about. And otherwise, fuck all cops. Let's move on to Yojimbo.
We talked about that briefly.
Briefly, because I don't actually have that much to say about the film, which I realized while watching it, I have very little to say about Yojimbo. Because I didn't realize when I picked this that this is the movie I had heard about it before, but this is the Akira Kurosawa film that inspired, quote unquote, A Fistful of Dollars.
Didn't inspire. It's literally the same film. Fistful of Dollars is the same film. It's the same film.
It's the same film, and for some reason, this type of film, this plot, does absolutely nothing for me. I don't feel compelled to care for anybody in this story, which makes the viewing really hard for me, because I have a hard time caring about the back and forth between these two gangs, towns, and then this one person meddling in between. It just doesn't compel me.
Well, I mean, within the first 20 minutes, it became apparent, like, okay, I know exactly where this movie's going, just because it is a fistful of dollars. And now I can see why Kurosawa sued Leone over the film.
Oh,
he did.
Did he?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, he should have.
I don't see how you wouldn't.
It's a direct ripoff.
Because
it's rare that American westerns ripped off a lot of Kurosawa.
But like this isn't ripping off. This is like this. Yeah, but Magnificent Seven, I like that to me is like a remake or a reimagining a different setting. It is the same film, same plot beats, like literally beat for beat, the same thing.
Yojimbo's better though.
I agree. So when I watched it, because of the fact it was pretty much the same film, it was hard for me to like, I had to work to be engaged because I knew what was going to happen because I'd already seen the film before. However, I do think it's a better film because one, I think that this film does a better job of showing like the devastation that the meddling that the samurai does on the town better than Clint Eastwood does. Like they don't show the effects of how, you know, in that Western, how, you know, the rivalry is actually ruining the town. But in this, they do, you know, it's ruining their, you know, their breweries, their silk, not factories, but like manufacturing building. I don't really know what the word is. But, you know, it's actually ruining their town. And I think that's a better aspect than in that film. But also, I feel like this film has this underlying current, and it's very similar to Seven Samurai in that way, which I think that film's a masterpiece. I think this film's very good. Not quite,
it's
not
my
near the
least
same level.
favorite Akira Kurosawa film that I've seen. I prefer him.
Me too, but I've only seen
Rashomon,
two.
Seven Samurai.
Yeah. But I do like how the film is really about like the codes and honors of a samurai. And it's really about how like this guy, for whatever reason, like is clearly jaded and doesn't care. But over the course of the film, it's like, okay, so he begins to regain his honor, and the villain is like the opposite of him, and that like he's a samurai with, you know, with no honor, uses a gun, which is not very like, you know, isn't very traditional like samurais are, but you know, he still beats them, this and that. So like, I thought that part of the film was very interesting, and the devastation on the town I thought was it was a new and really good element. It's just, to me, the film dragged out, which is a negative, but it's also a positive because the way that Kurosawa in both films, the way he uses silence and quiet moments, I find to be very, very, very effective. And it's something he does well in this film, and something he does great in Seven Samurai. It's just, it's unfortunate that the film, honestly, it's just unfortunate that we watched A Fistful of Dollars first, because I bet if I had watched this first, I would have enjoyed it more.
I agree.
But I did have to consistently engage myself, because I'm like, I know where this is going. I know where this is going, because it's actually the same, like even to the point where there's a woman that one of the bad gangs kidnaps from their family and husband, and the main guy saves them and rescues them and sends them away, but then he gets beat up over it, and then is like nurtured away by like the barkeep. It is the same. The only thing that's not the same is like the final showdown. The last 10 minutes are different. Everything else is the same.
You mentioned the kidnapping of the one woman in between the two gangs.
Yeah.
That touches upon something I wanted. The one interesting thing I had to say about this, it's that the movie strikes a really good balance between great humor and sadness.
It does.
The movie's
I was
very
going to mention
funny.
that. There's a good black humor streak through it.
The deadpan humor from sorry, I forget. He's a fantastic actor, and I will say his name. He's in all Kurosawa films.
Which one is he the main? Is he the main samurai?
Toshiro Mifune.
Yeah.
Toshiro
He's
Mifune.
very good in it.
He's in Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, High-Low, Throne of Blood. He's in everything. He's fantastic. He's so funny, but like the humor is also very deadpan coming from him.
Yep.
There's one shot where he's just laughing, seeing the two gangs like fight each other with swords, and he's like standing above in between.
I love that shot. It was like it's a low angle, but you see both on both sides, but they don't want to attack. But he's high on top of that perch, like laughing. I love that shot. Like the film is amazingly well made, obviously.
Yeah, it's just a great Kurosawa
it's just that we knew
film, but we knew the plot going in.
We knew which is
also this movie features some straight up like Kurosawa cinematography that is present throughout all his films, and when it comes to like the telephoto lens, very sharp focus.
Between these two films, I think that Kurosawa, and I want to watch more and see how he uses color. But the way I think he uses black and white in the best way.
You cut out for a bit. You there?
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
I was just saying that was super short.
That's fine. Is that I think Kurosawa uses black and white in a way that is more inventive and stylistic than any other filmmaker I've seen have black and white films. Like the way he uses like shadows and black and white for like composition and framing is just like it is beautiful to watch his films, and there's no color. And I think that is something that is very, very special about his films.
I'd like to clarify, if you're listening to the audio of this, the audio on Ryan's side very briefly cut out.
Right.
And I don't want to have to cut it out because it was so brief, but I have to mention it.
Short.
I don't want. Then you won't understand why there was a little bit of silence in between. But.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah,
the cinematography, fantastic.
Score, all of it is great. It's just we knew the plot.
Score was great.
I think this is score was great.
Score was a lot of drums going on, like repetitive themes.
Yeah, I thought the score was fantastic. It's just, it is a fistful of dollars, and I really like A Fistful of Dollars, but it is my least favorite of that trilogy of films, just because it's the most simplistic. And I feel like this film is better because it's not as simplistic as that film, but it's still the same film, and it's hard to get away from that. And maybe in the future I'll watch Yojimbo more and appreciate it more, and watch Fistful of Dollars less, because I've seen Fistful of Dollars like a few times, and this is only the first time I've seen Yojimbo. So I thought it was a very good film. Objectively, it is an excellent film, but like it's not really one I will go back to, just because, like, again, we know it is a fistful of dollars, and like it's just hard to break away from that, I feel like, unfortunately.
I agree that it hurts from the fact that we saw Fistful of Dollars first.
Yeah,
that's all I have to say on the film, really.
Me too.
I was really not when we were planning, when I saw Yojimbo, and when I hadn't decided we should look at I'm Not Your Negro also as well. I was very demotivated to this episode because I had so little to say.
That's okay.
But now I feel like
it happens.
We've been able to talk about it enough.
Yeah. I agree.
Let me see my notes if I have anything else. An arm gets chopped off at the start, and I'm like,
yeah, that was something that.
Is this where George Lucas took the bit from in
A New Hope? Yeah,
because he's a huge Kurosawa nut that extends beyond just him using the plot beats of A Hidden Fortress in Star Wars.
Yeah.
He's a massive fan. So was Francis Ford Coppola. I know that Francis Ford Coppola named his dog Yojimbo.
Really?
After this film. Yeah.
Okay.
He's a huge. I think Sofia Coppola mentioned it in an interview I saw, that her dog growing up was named Yojimbo.
Oh wow! Okay.
I think it was in a Criterion-related video, but yeah.
Okay.
But
yeah,
so this movie has a huge influence on Western filmmakers that I think can't be understated, and so I do recommend checking out the film, as well as.
Oh, I'd recommend it for sure.
All the other Kurosawas.
Because if you haven't seen A Fistful of Dollars, or even if you have, it's still a good film. It's still a really, really good film. And I'd still definitely recommend it for that. I mean, I think Seven Samurai is a full-blown masterpiece that lives up to its hype, but it's also a 3.5-hour film.
Rashomon to me is a masterpiece, and it's an hour and a half.
I need to see that. Rashomon, Kagemusha, Ran, and Hidden Fortress are the last four major Kurosawa films I have to see.
High and low.
High, low, so 5.
Is it high, low, or is it high and low?
I thought it was high,
it's
low.
High and low. High and low.
Oh, high and low.
Also, Throne of Blood. He has so many. Throne of Blood.
So I really want to go through his filmography properly. Actually, watching that yesterday did really want me to go through Japanese cinema, mainly Miyazaki's films and Kurosawa's films, and really get into it more. But anyways, I definitely would recommend it. I think it's a really good film. If you tuned in for I'm Not Your Negro, great. But if you're also looking for an interesting, entertaining film, this is definitely it. I feel like Yojimbo's is a really good film.
Well,
in my opinion. That's
all I have to say.
Me too.
To close out the episode, I will say it for a third time. Check the links in the description where you can donate, do petitions, all that stuff. It doesn't take a lot to just help, especially if you're posting black squares on Instagram and not doing anything else. Please do something For God's sake.
That kind of annoyed. Yeah,
I had some heated
we can talk about that.
moments
We can talk about that after the pod, because I think you and I are going to agree very much.
We don't have to talk about after the pod. It's just that
we don't want to upset anybody that actually did do that.
No, because because it's all about like, yeah, I won't get into it too much, but like
I agree with you.
The hashtag Blackout Tuesday, is it Blackout Tuesday? That hashtag that people were using has more posts under it on Instagram than the Black Lives Matter hashtag. So what the hell was the point? Because you're undermining everything, and okay. There's a lot of Black content creators who are putting my words much more better when it comes to why that whole hashtag wasn't really helpful. So
to me, there's that side of it, but the other side of it is people think that they do that and it's enough.
Oh, exactly. No, that's
to me that's the biggest problem. And they do it on Instagram or social media to be like, see, I care, but then they don't do anything else. Yeah. And to me, that I find to be very, very irksome. Yeah. So just in general, even if you didn't do that, just like, it's good to donate and it's good to be a part of it in some way or show your support. Like, if you want to be helpful and promote, don't put a black screen on Instagram. Put on your Instagram or Snapchat stories of like, certain Black artists, creators, voices, musicians,
filmmakers. Saying anything interesting and valid.
Right. And it doesn't have to be specifically about what's going on. It's just get their content out there for their voice to be heard. That helps in its own way.
If you know people, friends, family members who don't understand the situation because they maybe aren't on social media as much and aren't seeing what's happening, sit down or Skype with them or Zoom with them and try and explain what's happening and talk to them about it, because they might not have a full understanding of what is happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
Which
I totally agree.
Be very helpful, just talking to people.
Yep. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I agree totally.
Yeah, and just seek out Black voices who are saying interesting things at the moment. That's what I'm gonna say. Please, if you watch I'm Not Your Negro, read more James Baldwin.
I will be.
Do what you can. Just watch 13th. I haven't seen it, but apparently it's fantastic. It's on Netflix.
Yeah, I will be watching it.
I will be watching it as well. Just spread the word. Do what you can.
Yep.
We're not the first people to have said any of this, so
no.
But we'll repeat it anyway.
Yep.
Links in the description of the episode. That's what we have to say this week. It's it's very sad, but very real.
Yes. Yes, I think that closes out nicely our thoughts for this week. Next week will be a very different left turn, and we will be doing Tropic Thunder with our first guest, which is our mutual friend from high school, Shoh. And that's a really fun film, and in its own right. Hopefully next week when we talk about it, it'll be a nice reprieve from everything going on. There's still space for things to be lighthearted and things to celebrate life and enjoy in other ways. So we will be doing that next week. But for this week, we've really put the focus on, like Moses said, Black voices and artists and creators, and go out and find their stuff and donate. There's lots of ways to be active. So, make it be now and be a part of it now.
Mm-hmm.
Is what yeah.
Yes, completely.
Yep.
Stay Kino, everybody. Please.
Yeah,
donate.
Stay Kino. Stay safe. Please donate, and be part of the movement.
Yep. Black Lives Matter.
All right. Well, yeah, Black Lives do matter. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.